Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Rumsey, and you're watching a video that I put together for a blog post on my website at www.chiropracticanchorage.com. I will try to keep it short and sweet. Basically, what we're talking about is forward head posture and how that plays into spinal degeneration and the dysfunction and the pain that goes along with that, because everybody sees their x-rays that they have degeneration and they say, oh my gosh, it looks horrible. Am I going to die? How did that happen? You're not going to die, but we do know how it happens, and it has everything to do with mechanics and leverage and looking at where the head is compared to the neck. First class lever, teeter-totter. You got a fulcrum in the middle. You've got a weight or a load on one side, and you've got an effort on the other side to balance that load. If you want to balance, then if you have a 10-pound load, you need a 10-pound effort. And there is one particular concept that's important in terms of spinal degeneration and understanding just how important the position of that head is, and that is something called effective load at the fulcrum. Because the fulcrum here, as we'll see, is the spinal joint, and the effective load, as you'll see, can be tremendously large. In order to calculate that, you take the actual load, which is at 10 pounds, you multiply it by the length of the lever arm, which here we'll call it 10 inches between the fulcrum and the load, because 10 times 10 is easy to multiply, gives us 100 pounds, and you add the counterbalancing effort. What is the effort on the other side that takes to balance that? And in this case, that's 100 pounds. So 100 plus 100, 200 pounds at that fulcrum, or that spinal joint, if we're talking about the neck. Kind of a surprising amount considering the fact that we only started with a 10-pound load, but that's what leverage does for you. That's why we use levers to move heavy things, right? If we look at what happens in the context of posture, this guy, pretty good looking guy. I'd say his head's about 10 pounds or so, but the good news is it's located directly above the shoulders and the body where it should be located. Nice forward curve in his neck. You wouldn't mind being this guy, except for the hand. That hand is kind of messed up. This guy, on the other hand, not looking so good. Still has a 10-pound head, except that now that head is forward of the body, forward of the shoulders. And if we say that it's forward about 3 inches, we can use that equation we talked about before, the first part of it. We can multiply 3 times 10, and that tells us that instead of a 10-pound head, now that head is basically a 30-pound head as far as the muscles are concerned, because it is the muscles that have to hold that head and neck up over the body here. Now, the effective load is what takes place at that spinal joint. That's a little more difficult to calculate because you have to know the length of the muscles, because we need to know the length of that other lever arm. Suffice it to say that that is going to be a tremendous load at that spinal joint, and the further forward that head moves, the greater that amount of force is. That is a problem because the constant muscle contraction that's required to balance this type of postural distortion is going to create things like muscle fatigue and myofascial pain syndromes. You get trigger points. They refer pain to places like the jaw. They create headaches. They can create shoulder pain, arm pain, all kinds of garbage that you don't want to deal with, that you don't have to deal with if we don't have forward head posture. And in terms of spinal degeneration, all of that weight on that lever, which is that spinal joint, is going to start to affect the cartilage in the spinal joint. It's going to accelerate the amount of degeneration, it's going to cause inflammation, and it's going to compress the disc. That disc is what is basically bearing that effective load. And as the disc wears down, you have problems with people get herniated discs, they get bulging discs. It can really start to cause some neurological problems. And the constant muscle contraction in these counterbalancing muscles is going to create what's basically a cascade of events that leads to muscle fatigue and inflammation, fibrosis, right? So if you're one of those people who has very stiff neck, you have muscles that have shortened, they're not flexible, you have limited muscle elongation, restricted joint movement, all that stuff occurs over time, and it occurs as a result of just faulty biomechanics in that head, neck, and the rest of the spine. So from a simple lever point of view, you've got the weight of the head on the left here, the fulcrum is the spinal joint, and the muscle contraction having to keep that weight up. The head is located over the shoulders, over the body, you're in good shape. The minute that starts to move forward, it can really exponentially increase the amount of muscle contraction that's necessary and increase the amount of stress on those joints. That looks pretty bad sometimes. This gal in her 50s, not that old, but just a tremendous amount of forward head carriage. Look at the top of the spine versus the bottom. Top of the spine, you have good spaces in between the bones. We've got discs there. You look on the bottom of the spine, not much for discs. Those are pretty well degenerated. And this individual has a lot of neurological problems. You can see that there's a lot of just the edges, the margins of those bones and those bottom three vertebrae, terrible looking. They're all cruddy and white and arthritic. And even if you look at C4, that fourth bone in the neck, how far forward that has slipped on top of the fifth bone, that is a dangerous situation because there's a spinal cord located directly behind there, and you can really start to cause some neurological problems, not just in the head and the neck, but anywhere in the body, because that spinal cord carries all the nerves that go from the brain to the body. And lest you think that this is just an unavoidable part of aging, take a look at this gal. She's well into her 80s. She has a head that's right over her shoulders. She has spaces in between each of those spinal vertebrae. They're not huge, but they're very appropriate for an 80-plus-year-old. You're going to have some shrinkage in those discs. They do lose water content over time, but that is entirely appropriate. Really no evidence of any arthritic change, any osteophyte growth, good forward curve in the neck, and wouldn't you know it, this gal has been under chiropractic care pretty much all of her life. She still is. She's very healthy. She's very happy at 80-plus years old, and that is the type of neck that you want to have. Now, there are situations where you have forward head posture because you've been in maybe motor vehicle accidents. There's nothing you can do about the fact that it's there, but it is correcting it, and correcting it as soon as possible that is the key. This individual, he is in his late 20s, early 30s, multiple motor vehicle accidents, and yeah, we have on that pre-X-ray on the left, bad looking forward head posture. Pretty reminiscent of that gal on the earlier picture on the left with that forward head carriage and the arthritis and the disc space loss. Now this person, they don't have the loss in the disc height, they don't have the arthritic change, but that's because they're young and the problem has not been around that long. They will accumulate that damage if this goes unchecked, but they did not allow it to go unchecked. They came into the office, they said, mainly because of neck pain and jaw pain. Took a look, I said, ooh, that is terrible looking. We need to do something about that, and we did, and the post X-ray on the right here, that's what happens when an individual it really takes the right steps to get a mechanical correction in that head and the neck. Upper cervical chiropractic care, NUCA, upper cervical chiropractic care, and others are very effective at correcting these types of problems. And this person is in a much better place now than they were before, and they will be in a much better place, especially in 10, 20, 30 years, than they would be had they just allowed this to stay in that awful position. So if you have forward head carriage, if you know someone that does, chiropractic care, specifically upper cervical chiropractic care, is a way that you can prevent having that type of accelerated degeneration that leads to pain, that leads to neurological dysfunction later in life. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to jump over to my website. Again, that's www.chiropracticanchorage.com. I've got a contact form on there. You can always contact me that way. And take a look around. There's some other information there as well. Just want to thank you for listening, and have a great day.